I'm fine. I'm fine. The stories are true. This is the Spear of Leonidas, the hero's blade. Herodotus, 431 BC. Hello, I'm Andrew, and I want to welcome you to Visions of the Past, a podcast all about the lore of Assassin's Creed. This is episode 82, and today we're going to talk about the known Spears of Eden. But before we get into that, I want to briefly talk about the news that came out this week from Jason Schreier. In the last week, he came out with some information regarding a big Assassin's Creed project, codenamed Assassin's Creed Infinity. While I could talk about what Infinity could be, or how it could be good or bad for the series, I'm going to save that for an upcoming podcast. Instead, there's something else I want to talk about before we get into the Spears of Eden. I want to talk about the mention in his article that Ubisoft investigated every allegation and took appropriate actions from the misconduct allegations from last year. According to the spokeswoman that Jason spoke to, every allegation was investigated and appropriate actions were taken. A few hours after the article went live on Bloomberg, Ubisoft posted information about Infinity, including the leadership of the new combined team in Montreal and Quebec. And that included people who were named in last year's allegations. Normally, I'd just let this go because these kind of things are something that should be dealt with internally, within the company, and privately. But I do have a problem. As someone who cares about how the games are made and that those teams are working in a safe environment, as I believe a safe environment brings the best out of people, not fear or hate, I'm concerned that the people left in charge of this team could fall back into old habits when it comes to their management style. And when I see reports from a day or two after the Bloomberg report that states employees at Ubisoft are unhappy with the way that the allegations were handled, it makes me uneasy. If employees are already coming out and stating disappointment over how the allegations were handled, as well as Ubisoft's HR department not doing anything of value in their response, it makes me think that the leadership within this team will fall back into old habits, leading to issues within the team itself that will affect the end quality of Assassin's Creed Infinity. It's my firm belief that every single allegation needs to be taken seriously with drastic change to the company culture to keep employees that make the games that we love want to stay at Ubisoft and not want to head to new gaming companies that are springing up around Montreal and around the world. When employees feel respected and that they're heard, that is when creativity flows the best. When you treat people like they don't matter, that is when you lose them, and not only hurt your income, it makes it look like the only thing you care about is the money you are making and not the people you affect. Reading the reports made my heart hurt. It honestly made me want to skip this week's podcast. But then I realized that I don't do this podcast for the leadership. I do this podcast to show the love and care that the development team puts in Assassin's Creed is seen and in itself loved. Thank you for everything that you have put into this series, but do not be afraid to do what is best for your personal health and safety. Every day, we must do better to hold Ubisoft accountable for the culture they cultivate in the workplace. Now, let's take a look at these Spears of Eden. Believe it or not, the Spears of Eden are a fairly new introduction to the plethora of Pieces of Eden. First introduced in Assassin's Creed Odyssey and seen again in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, there are three known Spears of Eden: the Spear of Leonidas, Gungnir, and Gae Bolg. It's difficult to give abilities that these spears share, as they are all three weapons used within their respective games, and each of them have their own special abilities. So instead of giving you an idea of what each share, I'm going to dive right into what we know about each spear. First up is the Spear of Leonidas. Built during the Easter era by Hephaestus, the spear was eventually passed to the first wife of the Spartan king, Anaxandridas II, the mother of King Leonidas I, who eventually gave the spear to Leonidas himself, and who then went on to use the spear for the rest of his life. Unfortunately for him, His life was ended on August 11th, 840 BC, during the Battle of Thermopylae. When the spear itself was broken during the battle, it was passed down to his daughter Marini, and around 448 BC, Marini passed the spear down to her own daughter Cassandra, who was right around the age of 7 at the time. Cassandra used the spear for over 25 years during her exploits around ancient Greece. It's unknown when she passed the spear off to Herodotus, but she did state that it was meant to be something for him to remember her by, and she had exhausted its power. It's also unknown how long Herodotus kept the spear, but he eventually buried it with a volume of histories that eventually became known as the Lost Histories. The spear sat until it was found in 2018 by Layla Hassan. On the spear, Layla found DNA that allowed her to relive the memories of Cassandra through either Cassandra herself or her brother Alexios, using the animus HR 8.5. After reliving the memories of Cassandra during the Peloponnesian War, Layla found Atlantis, and it was here that she met Cassandra herself and offered her back the spear, which Cassandra declined. It is assumed that Layla continued to hold the spear until her death in 2020, where it is also assumed to have been left in the hands of Sean Hastings and Rebecca Crane. The problem with giving a concise list of everything that the Spear of Leonidas can do within the Assassin's Creed universe is that it can be seen as the reason that Cassandra has so many superhuman abilities within Assassin's Creed Odyssey. One of the issues that I have with Odyssey, though, is how difficult it is to differentiate between what Cassandra canonically could do and what she did, and what the animus changed within the simulation of her life. For that reason, I tend to look at the canonical abilities of this Spear of Eden to be the abilities that were mentioned in the novelization of the game and what the official collection magazine added. These abilities were increasing her awareness, enhancing her reflexes, the power of controlling the weather, and a no questions asked guest spot on this podcast by granting her visions of the past. Bad jokes aside, there are some questions that I have about the Spear of Leonidas, and they all really deal with its history. The spear went from Leonidas' mother to Leonidas to his daughter to his granddaughter. But why didn't it go to Leonidas' son Plistarchus? Was the spear meant to travel down the matrilineal line and couldn't because Leonidas didn't have a sister? Can the power that it holds only be controlled by a woman who shares DNA of the Isu that Hephaestus forged it for? And if that's the case, could Aya have found it and used it to have the same abilities that Cassandra had? I know Cassandra stated it stopped working, so she gave it to Herodotus. But that very well could have been because of interference from the staff of Hermes and Aletheia connecting to it to further her plans. The next spear we're going to talk about is the personal spear of Odin, Gungnir. This piece of Eden is based on the Norse mythological weapon of the same name. According to the myths, it was made by the sons of Ivaldi, and was said to have runes on it that increased its aim and deadliness. The history of Gungnir within Assassin's Creed, though, isn't that vast. Odin carried it out of the Yggdrasil device during the Toba catastrophe, with it somehow becoming lodged within the cave Gungnir, where it was picked up by Eivor Varinsdottir in 877 on her way to Yggdrasil. How long did Eivor use it, or what happened to it afterwards? We don't know. Gungnir was shown to be able to extend itself and was said to create a force field around its user, all seemingly abilities related to what was said about the mythological weapon. The last spear that we're going to talk about today was introduced in the Wrath of the Druids DLC of Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and because of that, we will see spoilers for the DLC. This spear is known as Gae Bolg. Gae Bolg is known within Irish mythology as the Spear of Cuchulainn. This spear was said to be given to Cuchulainn by the warrior woman Scathach, who only taught him how to use it. Made from a bone of the Curid, Cuchulainn used the spear as a last resort in battles with his foster brother Feridid and his own son Canala, resulting in both Feridid and Canala's deaths. Within Irish myth, the spear could only be used after being made ready in a stream, and then only if thrown with Cuchulain's feet. And once it hit its target, barbs would flow through the target's body that could only be removed by cutting them out, resulting in the target's death. Within Assassin's Creed, though, the spear is shown to use lightning to shock the wielder's target. The only known history of the spear is that Cuchulainn wielded it for most of his life, until he met the Fomorian Balor. During the fight between the two, Cuchulainn was killed, but was able to lodge Gae Bolg in Balor's back. During Eivor Varinsdottir's time in Ireland, she retrieved a shard of amber every time she killed a member of the Children of Danu. And once each had fallen to her blade in 882, she took all of the shards of amber to Deirdre na Linny. Deirdre then brewed Eivor a potion that she drank from in front of a large stone with the Triskelion rune carved on it and a spear sticking out of its base. Eivor promptly had a vision where she fought Balor, eventually defeating him. Waking up from this vision, she pulled the spear from the stone to find that it was Gae Bolg. There is a few things during Eivor's retrieval of Gae Bolg, which, after Eivor pulls from the stone, we don't know what happened to it, as, like Gungnir, it wasn't in Eivor's grave. One of these is that Deirdre stated that she was sure that Eivor remembered Balor. With Eivor being from Norway and knowing nothing of Irish myth, which she stated as much, the idea that Deirdre would think that Eivor would remember Balor, whom Deirdre mentions that Odin fought, insinuates that Deirdre somehow knows that Eivor is a reincarnation of Odin. Another thing that I found interesting was that Balor called Eivor Fjolnir, who himself was a legendary king in Norse mythology, that was said to be the son of the Norse god Frey and his consort, the Jotun Gertha. This is also something that's rather interesting, because if Balor is calling Eivor Fjolnir, even if she looks like herself in the vision and not Odin, that means that without a doubt Balor was seeing her as Odin, and that when Odin fought Balor, he was under the name Fjolnir, who, according to Norse myths, would have been Odin's nephew, assuming that he was a real person within Assassin's Creed. The last issue that I have is about the inspiration of the spear. Comparing Assassin's Creed's version of Gae Bolg and the mythic one, we see they have only two things in common: the barbed design and that they were both held by Cuchulainn. Gae Bolg within Assassin's Creed seems to have more in common with one of Lug's many spears. Lug, the grandson of Balor, was known to have had many spears, one of which is thought to be symbolic of lightning. And another interesting thing to note is that during the Second Battle of Mag Tyrd, Balor killed Nuada Artglam, and before Balor could use his destructive eye, he was killed by Lug with either a sling stone or one of his spears. If we dive deeper into the Irish myths, like the Irish cycle pages that Eivor found in Ireland, this leads me to believe it is possible that Cuchulainn is the Lug that killed Balor, and that Lug the polymath that we've seen in other places within Assassin's Creed Valhalla is meant to be his father. The pages state flat out that Cuchulainn is the son of Lug, and that Gae Bolg is the spear that slew Canla. These pages even go on to talk about Leifal and the Isu Morgan. With these papers, it's very easy to put together a story where there was confusion on the slaying of Balor and which spear was used, because there are some who studied Irish myth that believe Cuchulainn is an incarnation of Lug, even though Lug is the father of Cuchulainn. As you can see, the Spears of Eden are extremely different from each other, and vastly different from the other pieces of Eden that were built for war, like the Swords of Eden. While the swords helped one command a large army, It seems the spears were meant to only bolster the battle prowess of the wielder instead of the whole army. I'm interested to see if these pieces of Eden will be expanded on, or if this is all we get from them. There are so many gaps in the history of these weapons that there is a lot of room to tell new stories with them. I think working more on the Spear of Leonidas is a good thing, as that allows to show more of what abilities was given to Cassandra by the spear, and which were done with the Animus. But what do you think of the Spears of Eden? Let me know on Twitter at visions_AC. Thank you for joining me today. Be sure to tune in every Tuesday for new episodes. If you love stories about Assassin's Creed lore, please follow this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcasting platform. And tell your friends about this podcast. If you have any questions about Assassin's Creed or topics that you'd like me to cover, please feel free to hit me up on Twitter and Instagram at visions_AC, and you find those links in the show notes below. Until next time, my assassin friends, make sure to follow the Creed, and to those Templars listening, may the Father of Understanding guide you.